My husband mocked me at a pool party, saying I wasn't as attractive as his brother's new wife, so I put him in his place. I was standing barefoot on my own patio, holding a karaoke microphone in one hand and another woman's phone in the other, while 20 guests watched the grin slide off my husband's face 1 millimeter at a time. I'd like to make a toast to the birthday boy, I said, and my voice came out sweet. Sweeter than the cupcakes I'd iced one-handed that morning with a 2-month-old on my hip. Carl raised his beer. He actually raised his beer. 40 years old, standing by the grill he hadn't touched, in the backyard I'd decorated, at the party I'd paid for, and he still thought this was going to be praise. The phone screen glowed against the June sun. Behind me, the pool filter hummed. Somewhere to my left, his brother Steve stood very still with his jaw set like concrete, and Steve's wife Alice held my sleeping daughter against her shoulder and nodded at me once, slow, like a witness being sworn in. 10 minutes earlier, my husband had announced to this entire party that his brother's wife looked better in a swimsuit than I did. What he didn't know, what he was about to find out in front of every person he'd ever wanted to impress, was that she'd been saving his text messages for 5 weeks. But to understand how a 35-year-old insurance claims adjuster ended up running the most public coverage investigation of her life at a 40th birthday pool party, you have to go back 5 months, back to when I still believe my husband was unemployed by accident. My name is Nina. I'm 35. For 12 years, I've worked as a senior claims adjuster at Meridian Mutual, which means I spend my days reading files and finding the one sentence that doesn't match the photographs. Water damage that predates the storm. A signature that leans the wrong way. The gap between what people tell you happened and what the paper trail says happened. I'm good at it. I have a plaque and everything. I just never thought I'd have to open a file on my own marriage. 2 months before the party, I gave birth to our daughter, Annika. 7 pounds, 1 ounce, a full head of black hair, and a set of lungs she deployed at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and 5:15 a.m., with the reliability of a municipal train schedule. Our son Bradley is 3. He is currently the world's leading authority on dinosaurs and believes with his whole heart that a triceratops could be persuaded to live in our garage if we asked it nicely. I love those 2 kids the way you love things that have rearranged your skeleton, which is convenient because for the last 5 months I have been the only adult in our house doing anything for them before 10 a.m. Carl lost his job in March. Regional sales manager at Halloran Building Supply. 14 years. Gone in a restructuring. That's what he told me, sitting at our kitchen table with his hands folded like a man delivering a eulogy. I held his hand. I told him we'd be okay. I meant it. And then I went back to work 6 weeks after a C-section because somebody had to pay the mortgage, and the somebody was me. Here is what my days looked like. Up at 2, 4, and 5 with Annika. Pumping under my blazer at 6:40 while stirring Bradley's oatmeal with my free hand. Client calls at 9 on 4 hours of broken sleep. Claim files until 5. Then home to laundry, dinner, bath time, dinosaur negotiations, and a husband who had migrated to the couch sometime around noon and put down roots. Did you apply anywhere today? I'd ask. I'm networking, Carl would say, never looking up from his phone. Then he'd tilt the screen away from me. I told myself it was job listings. I told myself it was LinkedIn. I told myself a lot of things because I was too tired to tell myself the truth. And because 12 years of claims work has taught me that most people aren't lying. They're just embarrassed. Most people. The comments started in April. We were in the bathroom, both of us brushing our teeth, and Carl looked at my reflection instead of me and said, maybe you should think about the gym, babe. You've gained a lot of weight. I laughed because I thought it was the setup to a joke. Carl, I had a baby 9 weeks ago. I haven't peed alone in 3 years. I'm just saying. He rinsed, spat. Alice makes it look easy. Alice was Steve's new wife. 28, married 8 months, the kind of gorgeous that makes strangers walk into parking meters. And here's the thing that made it impossible to hate her. She was kind. Genuinely, inconveniently kind. She kept showing up at my door with lasagna. She held Annika so I could eat food while it was still hot, which after 2 kids qualifies as a spa experience. She sat cross-legged on my kitchen floor for 45 minutes, while Bradley introduced her to every dinosaur he owned, by name, with backstory. You don't have to be okay with me, she told me once, out of nowhere, drying my dishes. I know I married into this family fast. You don't owe me anything. I almost cried into the casserole. I was so tired that kindness had started to feel like a foreign currency. So when Carl said Alice makes it look easy, I did what exhausted women have done since the beginning of time. I minimized it. He's stressed. He's unemployed. He's 40 in June, and his little brother just married a 28-year-old, and men get weird about that. I told myself it was nothing. That was the first time. I want you to count with me, because I didn't count until it was almost too late. The second thing happened in early May. Carl started getting ready for family lunches like they were job interviews. Long showers, the cologne I'd bought him for our anniversary, the one he'd left in a drawer for 2 years. A new shirt appeared in the closet with the tag still on, $64, and I only know that because I found the receipt later, and by then, I was keeping receipts. At Steve and Alice's place, after Sunday lunch, Carl stood up and stretched and said, I can drop Alice at her sister's. It's on our way. It was not on our way. It was 11 minutes in the opposite direction. Steve frowned, not angry, just puzzled, the way you frown at a crossword clue, and said, I was going to take her. You've got the game on, Carl said. It's nothing. I sat in the passenger seat on the ride home with Annika's car seat behind me and did the thing I do at work when a claim smells wrong, but I can't articulate why. I lined up the facts: cologne, shirt, detours, a phone that had started sleeping face down on the nightstand like it had something to be ashamed of. And then I rationalized, because the alternative had teeth. He wants to feel useful. He's been out of work for 2 months. Driving someone somewhere is the only job he can get. That night, I reached for his phone to check the weather, the way I had 100 times in 11 years of marriage, and it asked me for a passcode that hadn't existed the week before. When did you put a code on your phone? Everybody has a code, Nina. He didn't look up. It's a security thing. You should have one too. My stomach did a slow, cold roll, like the first drop on a fairground ride. I noted the feeling. Then I filed it, the way I file everything, and I went to warm a bottle. The third thing was money, and money is my native language. Third week of May. I was pulling together documents for our health insurance. With Carl's coverage gone, the kids and I were on my plan, and I needed proof of his job loss for the enrollment paperwork. I asked him 3 times for the termination letter. He kept forgetting, so I did what any wife with a login does. I went into our filing cabinet and then into his email on the family iPad, which, unlike his phone, had never learned to keep secrets. The termination letter from Halloran Building Supply was there. It was dated January 9th, not March, January. My husband had been getting up, putting on a work shirt, and leaving the house for 2 months while I was pregnant, and I had no idea where he'd been going. He'd told me about the layoff on March 14th. I remember the date because it was 2 weeks before my due date, and I cried about the timing, and he'd let me comfort him. There was more. A second document from HR outlining his severance. $1,400 paid out in February. I checked our joint account with shaking hands. I went back through every deposit since Christmas. That money had never touched our marriage. I sat on the bathroom floor, the only room with a lock, while the shower ran for cover, and I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I did the math I'd been too tired to do. While I was pumping under my blazer and going back to work 6 weeks post-surgery because we were down to one income, my husband had $19,400 sitting somewhere with his name on it. I didn't confront him that night. I want to be honest about why, because it isn't flattering. I was afraid. Not of him. Carl has never been frightening, only disappointing, but of the size of it. When a claim comes across my desk with 1 inconsistency, it's usually a mistake. When it comes with 3, it's a pattern, and patterns have authors. Instead, I tested him. Casually, over dinner, I said, "The insurance paperwork needs your severance details. Was there anything, or did they just cut you loose?" Carl didn't blink. Couple grand. It went straight to the credit cards. I had the credit card statements in a folder upstairs. No large payments. Not in February, not ever. He lied to my face with mashed potatoes on his fork, and then he asked if there was more gravy. That was the night Nina the wife handed the file to Nina the adjuster. I started a folder. A real one. Manila. Hidden in a box of maternity clothes he would never open. Screenshots of the accounts. The termination letter. The severance summary. Dates. Amounts. Discrepancies. At work, we call it building the file. At home, it just felt like grief with a filing system. The fourth thing was the story. And the story was the part that almost broke me. First weekend of June, Sunday dinner at his mother's house. Diane is 71, sharp as a tack, and has loved me for 11 years. She was holding Annika, and out of nowhere, in the voice people use for condolences, she said, "You know, honey, marriage takes 2. Whatever's going on, I hope you're doing your part." My part? Carl says things have been hard since the baby. She patted my knee. That you've shut him out. Men need to feel wanted too, Nina. I sat there with my mouth open while my husband, 20 feet away, taught our son how to put into a plastic cup, playing Father of the Year for an audience. 3 days later, a text from Melissa, married to Carl's college roommate, Dominic. "Hey, this is awkward. Are you guys okay? Carl told Dom some stuff at poker, and I just want you to know I don't care what anyone says. You look great for having 2 under 4. What stuff?" I typed. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared for a full minute. Then, that you'd kind of let yourself go and stopped trying. That the marriage has basically been over for a while. I'm sorry. I'd want to know. The marriage has basically been over for a while. I stood in my kitchen and read that sentence maybe 30 times, and 12 years of professional instinct finally said it out loud. This is not a husband being cruel at random. This is groundwork. When someone plans to file a claim, they establish the damage in advance. He was going door to door through our entire social circle, pre-reporting the loss, building a record where the marriage failed slowly, sadly, no one's fault. Well, her fault, a little. She really did let herself go, so that whenever he walked, everyone would already have the story. He wasn't insulting me. He was drafting his exit narrative, and I was the depreciating asset. I confronted him that night. I had promised myself I'd wait, be strategic, but I'm a human being, and I'd been awake since 4. Why is your mother telling me marriage takes 2? Why is Melissa texting me that our marriage is basically over? Carl did something I will never forget. He sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a patient man, put down his phone screen side down, and said, "Nina, I think you should talk to someone. You've been paranoid ever since the baby. Everyone's noticed. That postpartum stuff can really mess with your head. Everyone's noticed." He'd even pre-filed that claim. The tired, unstable wife. If I got angry, it proved his point. If I cried, it proved his point. He had built a machine where every reaction I had was evidence for him. My hands didn't shake that time. That scared me more than the shaking would have. I just said, "Okay, Carl," and went upstairs. And I did 2 things. The first, I made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Renata Okafor, licensed clinical psychologist, 15 years in practice, specializing in postpartum adjustment. Partly because I genuinely needed a place to set the weight down, and partly, I'll own done this because if my husband was going to tell the world I was unraveling, I wanted a licensed professional on record saying I wasn't. In our first session, Dr. Okafor listened to the whole thing. The letter, the money, the comments, the phone, took her glasses off and said, "Nina, exhaustion is not instability, and documenting a pattern is not paranoia. In my field, we'd call what you're describing a coherent response to gaslighting." I cried in her office for 10 straight minutes, and it was the most functional thing I'd done in weeks. The second thing, I called a lawyer, not to file, to understand. Marisol Vega, 19 years of family law, came recommended by a colleague in our subrogation department who described her as the calmest shark you'll ever meet. Marisol reviewed my folder across her desk for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up and said, 2 pieces of advice. 1, do not confront him again. People who feel cornered move money, and he's already shown you he knows how. 2, keep doing exactly what you're doing. Dates, documents, screenshots, backed up somewhere he can't reach. If this ends where I think it's heading, the word you're going to hear a lot is dissipation. Dissipation of marital assets. Judges take it seriously. Paper wins cases, Nina. Feelings testify. Paper convicts. So I went home, and I smiled at my husband, and I kept his secrets for him while my folder got thicker. You want to know the loneliest feeling in the world? Lying next to someone who thinks he's getting away with it. And then Carl announced he was throwing himself a pool party for his 40th birthday. At our house. Set up by me. Paid for. I checked later. With $611 from our joint account. Spent by a man who had 19 grand hidden in another bank. Keep it simple, he said, and then invited 20 people. Saturday, June 20th. I was up at 5 with Annika anyway, so by noon I had iced 3 dozen cupcakes one-handed, hung the string lights, inflated a palm tree float with a foot pump while Bradley cheered, taped the happy 40th banner over the patio doors, and set out enough food for a small wedding. Carl slept until 9:30 and then supervised the placement of the beer coolers like a foreman. Guests arrived at noon. Steve and Alice came at 12:15. Alice took one look at me, the ponytail, the burp cloth on my shoulder, the 1,000-yard stare, lifted Annika out of my arms and said, "Go, eat a deviled egg in peace. That's an order." I remember thinking, whatever else is true, this woman has been good to me. I didn't know yet exactly how good. Around 2 o'clock, I went upstairs and put on the only swimsuit that still fit. Navy blue, one piece, older than my marriage. I stood in front of the mirror for a long minute and had the conversation every postpartum woman has with her reflection. The soft stomach, the new lines, the body that had been an around-the-clock cafeteria for 9 weeks. This body grew 2 humans, I told the mirror. That's enough. Then I held my head high and walked out to the patio. Carl was in the shallow end, holding a beer. He looked up at me, and he burst out laughing, loud, head back, in front of everyone. A couple of the guys chuckled along on reflex, the way men do, before they even know what's funny. Steve's laugh lasted half a second, and then it stopped like a switch had been flipped, and he went pale. At the time, I thought he was embarrassed for me. I found out later he'd gone pale, because he was the only person at that party who knew exactly what he was looking at. "What's so funny?" I asked. My voice stayed level. 12 years of hostile claim interviews will give you that, if nothing else. Carl wiped his eyes, still grinning, and gestured at the pool with his beer, where Alice had been swimming laps with Bradley's floaty dinosaur. Sorry. I couldn't help it. Alice was just in the water and come on. He looked around at his guests, inviting them in. She clearly looks better in a swimsuit than you do. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere and stopped. Nobody breathed. 20 adults stood in my backyard, in the food arrangement I had made, under the banner I had taped, and watched my husband rank me against his brother's wife at his own birthday party. Bradley, thank God, was at the snack table, deep in negotiations with a bowl of goldfish crackers, and heard none of it. I looked at Carl for 3 long seconds. Then I turned around, walked into the house, and quietly shut the bedroom door behind me. I sat on the edge of our bed. I didn't cry. I remember being surprised by that. There's a point past humiliation where everything goes very quiet and very clear, like the pressure drop before a storm. And I sat inside that quiet and thought, he did the comparison out loud, in public, in front of witnesses. He's not even pre-filing the claim anymore. He's submitting it. 30 seconds later, there was a knock. Alice slipped in and closed the door behind her. She'd thrown a cover-up over her swimsuit, and she wasn't carrying Annika anymore. She'd handed the baby to Diane, and her face had the fixed, formal composure of someone about to give testimony. She sat down next to me and unlocked her phone. "Nina, Carl has been texting me for 5 weeks." The room tilted a degree off its axis. Photos of himself, asking me to meet him for coffee while Steve's at work. Telling me his marriage is basically over, that you two are separated in everything but paperwork. I never answered, not once. But I saved everything because I know how this goes for women. If I deleted them and it ever came out, somehow it would become my fault. She took a breath. And this morning he sent one that crossed the last line I had. So an hour ago in the car, I showed Steve. All of it. She put the phone in my hands. 47 messages. I scrolled and I scrolled. Timestamps at 12:52 a.m., 1:14 a.m., 1:38 a.m. The exact hours I was down the hall feeding his daughter. Can't stop thinking about you in that sundress. Steve doesn't have to know we talk. My marriage has been over for a long time. Nina let herself go after the kids. You and me, we actually make sense. Come to the party Saturday. Wear the red one for me. Sent at 8:04 that morning while I was icing his birthday cupcakes. And there it was, in my hands, in his own words. At last, the cologne, the rides home, the passcode, the comments, the campaign through his mother and his friends. It had never been about my body. My body was the cover story. He was building himself an exit, one where he could walk out on the exhausted new mom everyone had been told about, and walk toward his own brother's wife, and somehow come out of it the sympathetic one. He'd underestimated exactly one thing: every woman in his blast radius. Why did you keep coming around? I asked. The lasagna, the dishes, all of it. You could have just avoided this whole family. Alice looked at the wall for a second, and when she looked back, her eyes were wet and furious at the same time. Because I watched him tell you to get to the gym while you were holding his baby, and I wasn't going to leave you alone in a house where someone was working that hard to make you feel crazy. And because you deserve to hear this from me, sitting down, in private, not from a crowd, not from a lawyer, from me. I looked at the phone, then at the mirror across the room, the same tired woman, the same navy swimsuit, except her spine had come back. Can I borrow this for a minute? I asked. Alice held my gaze. Then she reached over and typed in her passcode again so the screen wouldn't lock. Steve and I already talked, she said. Whatever you do next, we'll back you, word for word. Downstairs, the party had lurched back into motion, the way parties do after a car crash of a moment, everyone pretending, loudly, that they hadn't just watched what they'd watched. Somebody had turned the music up. Carl stood by the grill with a fresh beer, mid-story, doing the thing he does with his hands when he's performing. He'd rented a karaoke machine for himself. Of course he had. I walked to the speaker, picked up the microphone, and turned it on. Tap, tap. The yard went quiet in sections, like stadium lights shutting down. I'd like to make a toast to the birthday boy, I said sweetly. And we're back where we started. Carl grinning, the beer raised, Steve like concrete, Alice in the doorway with her arms crossed, Diane on the porch swing with my daughter, frowning at the tone of my voice the way mothers do when they hear weather coming. For months, I said, my husband has been telling me to look more like Alice. Get to the gym. Try harder. 10 minutes ago, he told all of you that she looks better in a swimsuit than I do. I smiled at him, and I finally figured out why he's such a big fan. I raised Alice's phone high, screen glowing. So let's all hear what the birthday boy has been texting his brother's wife at 1 in the morning. Nina? Carl's voice came out with a little laugh cocked into it, the sound of a man still sure he could sell his way out. Okay, babe, you've made your point. Give me the June 3rd, 12:52 a.m. I read. Can't stop thinking about you in that sundress. Steve doesn't have to know we talk. Someone's plastic cup crumpled in their hand. The music had stopped. I never saw who stopped it. June 11th, 1:14 a.m. My marriage has been over for a long time. Nina let herself go after the kids. You and me, we actually make sense. Those are out of context, Carl said, and his voice cracked on context, and 20 people watched it crack. This morning, 8:04 a.m., I looked up at him. Come to the party Saturday. Wear the red one for me. I lowered the phone. You sent that while I was icing your cupcakes, Carl. They're chocolate. I made them one-handed. He went for anger next, because anger was all that was left in the drawer. Alice was flirting with me for months. Ask her. I never answered one. Alice's voice from the doorway, calm as a court reporter. Not one, Carl. 47 messages. I saved every single word. I've seen all of them. Steve stepped forward, and his voice was low and terrible in the way only a little brother's can be. Everyone, Carl. An hour ago. I've been standing in this yard for an hour, deciding whether to let you have your birthday first. He looked at his brother like he was reading a stranger's mail. You laughed at her. That's what settled it. You stood in the pool and you laughed at her. You could hear the filter humming. You could hear ice shifting in the cooler. Carl looked around the yard for an ally and found 20 faces doing the math I'd been too tired to do for months. All of it landing at once. The mooching, the comments, the networking, his mother's talking points, Melissa's poker story. His social mask didn't slip so much as it dissolved, publicly, in the chlorinated light of the party he'd thrown for himself. Happy 40th, I said into the microphone. Cake's on the table. Then I set the mic down on the speaker, walked over to Diane, and lifted my daughter out of her arms. Diane's hands were trembling. She looked up at me and whispered, the things he told me. Nina, the things he told me. I squeezed her shoulder. That reckoning was hers to have with her son, and by the look on her face, it was going to be biblical. The guests evaporated inside of 15 minutes. Nobody took cake. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, at the perfect cinematic heat, but real life doesn't respect act breaks. Real life has paperwork, and Carl, it turned out, had one more move. Sunday night, 11:40 p.m., my phone buzzed with a bank alert. A transfer out of our joint checking. $4,300, everything above the minimum balance. Moved to an account ending in digits I didn't recognize. Carl had left Saturday night with a duffel bag to stay at a buddy's, and his first act as a publicly humiliated man was to grab the grocery money on his way down. Monday, 8:02 a.m., I was in Marisol Vega's office with my folder, Alice's screenshots. She'd sent me the complete set, time-stamped, that same night, and a diaper bag. Marisol flipped through it all, and the calm shark actually smiled. Okay, she said, here's your week. We're filing today, divorce petition, plus a motion for temporary orders, exclusive use of the house, a status quo order on all accounts, temporary support, and a parenting schedule. The transfer he made last night, best gift he could have given us. Combined with $19,000 in concealed severance, that's a documented pattern of dissipation before a judge who has seen this exact movie 100 times. She tapped the folder. I need declarations by Wednesday, 5 p.m. Yours, Alice's, Steve's if he's willing. He's willing, I said. They both are. One more thing. She looked at me over her glasses. He's going to say you're unstable. Postpartum. It's the oldest page in the playbook and he's already been distributing it. Do not respond to it in text, on the phone, or in person. Let it come into court, where it has to survive contact with evidence. She was right. Wednesday morning, Carl's response landed. Written by a lawyer he was presumably paying with my grocery money. Nina had been erratic and emotionally volatile since the birth. The party incident was a public outburst, demonstrating instability, and he had concerns about the children in my care. Reading it, my hands finally shook, not from fear, from the sheer nerve. This man had watched me keep his children alive on 4 hours of sleep, while he hid 19 grand and texted his brother's wife, and his opening move was concerns. That week nearly broke me anyway, and I want to be honest about that too, because the movies skip this part. Annika chose those exact days to fight sleep like it owed her money. Bradley, who understood only that Daddy was at a work trip, started asking questions at bedtime that took the air out of my chest. I had a claim review at work I could not miss. Declarations due Wednesday, a hearing Friday, and a body still assembling itself after surgery. Thursday at 2 a.m., feeding the baby in the dark, I reached the wall. The invisible one, where you sit in the glider and think, I cannot actually do all of this, and the dark agrees with you. At 2 a.m., I texted Dr. Okafor's office portal, expecting nothing. At 7:05 a.m., she called me herself. You're not failing, she said. You're carrying a 3-person load through a legal crisis on no sleep. Here's what we're going to do about the next 72 hours. And she laid it out like a flight checklist. Who to call, what to drop, what could burn. My mother drove in from Bakersfield that afternoon. Alice took Bradley to the Natural History Museum Friday morning so he'd spend hearing day with dinosaurs instead of tension. It turns out the opposite of a man who lets you drown is not a man who saves you. It's a list of people who show up with casseroles and checklists and their own 2 hands. Friday, Family Court, Department 6, Judge Elaine Kaplan presiding. 22 years on the bench, a reputation for being unimpressed by everyone equally. Carl's lawyer went first and performed the concerns. Erratic, volatile, the public outburst at the party. Then Marisol stood up, and it was like watching someone deal cards face up. Exhibit A, the termination letter, dated January 9th. Exhibit B, the severance summary, $1,900, February, deposited to an undisclosed individual account. Exhibit C, the joint account records showing none of it arriving. Exhibit D, the Sunday night transfer, $4,300, 11:40 p.m., the day after the party. Exhibit E, 47 text messages to Alice, authenticated by her sworn declaration, with timestamps overnight while the volatile wife was feeding his infant daughter. Exhibits F and G, declarations from Steve and from Dr. Ed Okafor, who wrote in a sentence I intend to have framed that I presented as an exhausted, high-functioning primary caregiver exhibiting an appropriate response to sustained deception. Then Marisol's forensic accountant, Priya Ramachandran, CPA, certified in financial forensics, 14 years tracing exactly this kind of thing, walked the court through where the severance had gone. Gym membership, February onward, Iron and Oak Fitness, $89 a month, a wardrobe refresh. Restaurant charges on days I could cross-reference with networking. And the one that made the courtroom go still, $20,150 on May 28th, a security deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment at the Wexford. He'd rented his exit 3 weeks before the party. While telling the world our marriage had died of natural causes, he'd already staged the getaway car. Judge Kaplan took off her glasses. She looked at Carl's attorney for a long moment. Counsel, she said, your client concealed his termination for 2 months, concealed a $19,000 severance, moved marital funds the night after a domestic dispute, and secured separate housing while representing to family members that his wife's mental state was the marriage's central problem. Meanwhile, the record before me shows She checked the file. Shows Nina returned to full-time employment 6 weeks post-surgery and has been the children's primary caretaker throughout. If there is instability in this family, the documents suggest it is not hers. Temporary orders granted across the board. Exclusive use of the house. Accounts frozen. The $4,300 to be restored within 10 days. Temporary support obligations that gave Carl, at last, an incentive to find a job. A standard parenting schedule. Alternating weekends, Wednesday dinners, because the kids love their father and the court's job, as Judge Kaplan put it, is to protect children, not to award them as damages. I didn't want Carl destroyed. I want to be clear about that, because the internet loves a flamethrower ending and I don't have one. I wanted the truth on the record and my kids safe and my grocery money back. I got all 3. That's what winning actually looks like. Quieter than you'd think, with a court date for a follow-up. The divorce finalized 7 months later. The dissipation claim meant the concealed severance and the drained checking came off Carl's side of the ledger in the settlement. Every hidden dollar accounted for and repaid in equity. I kept the house. He kept the 1-bedroom at the Wexford, which I consider the most poetic security deposit ever paid. The rest of the consequences, no judge ordered. Steve didn't speak to his brother for months, and when he finally did, at Diane's kitchen table, it was on terms Steve set. Diane apologized to me on my own porch, with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. And then, I heard about the this later from Steve, she retracted every talking point Carl had planted. Personally, phone call by phone call, to every relative and friend she'd repeated them to. 71 years old, undoing her son's whisper campaign, one apology at a time. The poker friends know. Melissa made sure. Nobody threw Carl a 41st. And Alice. People ask about Alice, whether it stayed weird. It didn't stay weird. She still shows up at my door with lasagna, except now she comes in without knocking, and she is contractually obligated by an agreement Bradley drafted verbally and enforces rigorously to greet the Triceratops first. 1 year later, almost exactly. A Saturday in June, I threw a party at our house. Not for a birthday. Annika had just taken her first stumbling laps around the living room, and Bradley had graduated preschool with a diploma he shows to strangers, and it seemed like the kind of summer that deserved cupcakes. I iced them with 2 hands this time. Annika supervised from her high chair with the gravity of a health inspector. 20 people came. My mother, Melissa, and Dominic. Steve, who manned the grill without being asked. Alice, who spent 40 minutes in the pool being chased by a 3-year-old and a floaty dinosaur. Around 2 o'clock, I went upstairs and put on a swimsuit. New one. Red, as it happens. I bought it myself for myself, and if there's a message encoded in the color, that's between me and the mirror. I stood in front of that mirror for a minute, same as last time. Softer stomach, new lines, the body that grew 2 humans and then carried all 3 of us through the year that followed. That's enough, I told my reflection. That was always enough. Then I walked out to my patio, into my party, past my banner, congrats Bradley in his favorite green, and nobody laughed, and nobody compared me to anyone, and my daughter shrieked with joy at the sight of me, which is, for the record, the only review of my body I accept these days. Carl spent months telling anyone who'd listen that Alice made it look easy. He lived in my house for 11 years and never once noticed the woman who made everything work. Now he gets to notice from a 1-bedroom apartment every other weekend.